right now, at this exact moment, someone who recently quit using cannabis is sitting in a doctor's office, and they're absolutely terrified.
Completely terrible.
Yeah, they're looking at a piece of paper that says their blood work just flagged positive for an autoimmune disease.
Right.
They're reading words like systemic lupus or scleroderma. They have severe body aches, they're sweating through their sheets at night, and they have this bone-deep fatigue.
And the doctor's concerned. The patient is panicking.
Exactly. But the reality, that patient doesn't have an autoimmune disease. They don't have lupus.
Well, they don't.
They're simply experiencing the bizarre, highly physical reality of day 3 of cannabis withdrawal. And their well-meaning doctor has just fallen into a massive, totally preventable diagnostic trap.
It is honestly one of the most fascinating and, completely misunderstood phenomena in modern medicine.
Yeah, we culturally treat quitting cannabis as this, purely psychological hurdle, like a test of willpower or a mental game.
Right, like you just need to be stronger. Right. But the neurological and immunological data tells a completely different story.
Completely.
When you remove regular cannabis exposure from a human body, the nervous system undergoes a structural and chemical earthquake. It is massive. The physical symptoms of that nervous system waking up can flawlessly mimic severe systemic illness.
And that is exactly why we are opening the source material today. There is a moment when a person decides today is different.
Right, not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow, not next week, not after that next big stressful project is over, just today. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2026. And if you are listening to this right now, you've likely made that decision.
And quitting doesn't begin with a flawless life plan, It begins with a single, very firm boundary in the present moment. Today, no cannabis.
Exactly. So this deep dive is designed to be your manual for that boundary. We aren't looking at the rest of your life.
No, the thought of forever is, it's overwhelming and, frankly, biologically unhelpful right now.
Right. We are putting a microscope on a very specific window of time, the first 72 hours.
Yes. Our mission today is to give you the biological blueprint of what is actually happening inside your cells, so you can simply observe it, understand it, and most importantly, stay steady.
To do that, we are synthesizing a literal mountain of data today.
Oh yeah, it's a huge stack.
We're looking at the 2025 peer-reviewed neuroimaging data from JAMA Network Open. We have the comprehensive cannabis withdrawal syndrome clinical reviews from the NIH.
We're also examining the acute timelines mapped out by the Oxford Treatment Center, Icon Recovery, and the Canadian Center for Addictions.
And crucially, we are going to decode the clinical guidelines on anti-nuclear antibody testing, those ANA assays, from Dr. Oracle and the Journal of Family Practice.
So you can avoid that exact medical trap we just talked about.
Right, so let's just jump right in. The foundation of all of this, the reason the withdrawal happens at all, lies in a biological network called the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS.
Yeah, before we can talk about what happens when you stop, we really have to understand the baseline of what the cannabis was altering in the first place.
Right.
The ECS is essentially the body's master controller for homeostasis.
The master thermostat.
Exactly. It's this vast network of receptors and neurotransmitters that stretches across your brain, your organs, your connective tissues, and even your immune cells.
It's just constantly working in the background to keep everything balanced. Like if your temperature gets too high, the ECS helps trigger a sweat response.
Right. Or if your stress levels spike, the ECS releases natural chemicals to calm the nervous system down.
It regulates mood, appetite, the sleep-wake cycle, memory consolidation, and, even how we perceive pain.
And it does this using our body's own naturally produced cannabinoids, specifically molecules like anandamide, which scientists actually often call it the bliss molecule.
The bliss molecule, that sounds great.
Yeah, it does sound great. And anandamide binds to specific receptors, primarily the CB1 receptors in the brain, to pass along these balancing messages.
But it's a delicate system, right? Highly refined.
Very delicate. The anandamide binds, delivers the message, and then it is immediately broken down by enzymes. It's quick.
But when someone uses cannabis regularly, they introduce a massive flood of a structurally similar external molecule, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC.
And THC does not behave like the delicate, short-lived anandamide.
Not at all. THC binds to those same CB1 receptors, but it binds with incredible affinity, and it just stays there much longer.
Right, it doesn't just deliver a subtle message, it hijacks the system. It floods the brain with a massive, prolonged signal.
I was reading the literature on receptor adaptation, and I think the best way to visualize this is to think of those CB1 receptors like the volume dials on a massive stereo amplifier.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because when you are constantly blasting the system with the loud, booming, heavy metal signal of THC, the brain does what any sensible biological organism would do to protect its hearing.
It turns the volume dials down.
It physically turns them down.
In neurobiology, the term for that is receptor downregulation and desensitization. It's a profound structural adaptation.
The brain realizes the signal is too loud, so it literally pulls the CB1 receptors back inside the cell membrane.
Right, a process called endocytosis, making them unavailable.
Which is wild to think about. They physically retreat.
They do. And the receptors that are left on the surface, they become chemically blunted. The brain is just desperately trying to maintain its baseline equilibrium against this daily flood of THC.
And we can actually see the physical evidence of those missing volume dials in real time. The JAMA Network Open data published in 2025 gives us an incredibly clear picture of this.
The fMRI study, yes.
Yeah, the researchers took a massive cohort, 1,003 young adults. They placed them inside an fMRI scanner, which is a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine that tracks blood flow and metabolic demand in the brain.
And they had these participants perform an NBAC task.
Which is, explain what that is for people who don't know.
Sure, it's a classic high concentration test for working memory. You have to hold a sequence of letters or numbers in your mind and identify when a new item matches one from, say, 2 or 3 steps back. It requires serious focus.
Right. And the findings were stark. The researchers mathematically controlled for recent use, meaning they filtered out the acute, immediate effects of being currently high.
They were looking purely at the long-term structural adaptation.
Yes. And they found that heavy lifetime cannabis exposure was associated with significantly blunted metabolic activation in 3 critical brain regions.
The anterior insula, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
So I want to break down what it actually feels like to have a blunted anterior insula. The insula is the brain's center for interoception.
Right, how we perceive our own internal bodily states.
Exactly, our heartbeat, our breathing, our internal emotional weather. If the insula isn't lighting up properly because the CB1 receptors there are downregulated, you get a sense of emotional numbing or a disconnection from your physical self.
And the medial and dorsolateral prefrontal cortices are equally vital. I mean, the dorsolateral PFC is your brain's CEO. It handles executive function, complex planning, abstract reasoning.
While the medial PFC deals with decision-making and retrieving memories.
Right, and because these areas are so dense with CB1 receptors, chronic THC exposure forces them to aggressively downregulate.
So when the individual tries to hold complex information in their working memory during that NBAC task, the fMRI literally shows these regions struggling to draw enough blood and oxygen to perform effectively.
The machinery is muffled.
The machinery is muffled. So we established this baseline, a brain that has pulled its receptors inward, a brain functioning with muffled machinery just to survive the daily flood of THC.
But then we reach today.
Right. You, the listener, decide the boundary is drawn. No cannabis.
The flood stops instantly, but the receptors are still hiding.
Exactly, which creates a profound neurological vacuum. The THC is gone, but the brain's natural anandamide isn't strong enough or plentiful enough to activate the few blunted receptors that actually remain on the surface.
And that sudden, deafening chemical silence is the exact root of every uncomfortable symptom you feel in the first 72 hours.
Your brain is trying to run its normal operations, tell you to eat, help you relax, put you to sleep, but the control panels are basically unplugged.
But here's the thing. The brain is an incredibly resilient machine. It doesn't just collapse. The moment the THC is removed, it recognizes the vacuum. And it instantly begins the grueling metabolic work of pushing those receptors back to the surface.
Recalibration.
Exactly. That brings us to the reality of the first 24 hours, day 1.
So if you are on day 1 right now, you need to share this. The biological goal isn't some grand spiritual transformation today.
Yeah, not at all.
It is merely surviving the disruption of a deeply ingrained pattern. The human brain is fundamentally a prediction machine, right?
Right. It creates highly efficient neural pathways based on your daily habits.
So if you always smoke right after work to transition into the evening or right before bed, your brain physically anticipates that chemical input.
It starts altering your internal chemistry minutes before you even take a hit. literally preparing for the arrival of the THC.
It's bracing for impact. So when that expected moment arrives and the THC does not, the brain essentially triggers an error code.
It sends a distress signal. Where is the expected input?
The system pauses because a foundational prediction about your environment has just been broken.
And that error code is not subtle. According to the clinical timelines from the Oxford Treatment Center and Icon Recovery, this is when the psychological and physical onset begins.
Right. Psychologically, it feels like a sudden, unexplainable static in the mind. You experience restlessness,
A sharp spike in irritability.
a vague tension wrapping around your chest or your shoulders.
And physically, the body's baseline regulation starts to falter, without the THC there to dictate the rhythm. Within the first 12 to 24 hours, the gastrointestinal tract begins to act up.
Because it's lined with its own endocannabinoid receptors, right?
Exactly. So patients frequently report a complete loss of appetite, mild nausea, or unpredictable stomach cramping.
You also see the beginning of temperature dysregulation.
Yes. The hypothalamus, which acts as the body's thermostat, struggles to find its baseline without the drug. So you get these sudden unprovoked bouts of sweating or unexpected chills.
And when you feel those chills, or when your stomach drops on day one, it requires a total mental reframe.
It really does.
The automatic thought is usually, I feel sick, I am broken, I need to smoke to fix this.
Right, I need my medicine.
Exactly, but the biology tells us the exact opposite. This isn't damage, it's simply your brain noticing a change. The predictability of the chemical flood has been broken.
The discomfort is literally just the sensation of your brain asking a question. Where is it?
If you can sit with that and observe it as a mechanical, biological process rather than a personal failure, it loses so much of its psychological power.
And that objective, non-judgmental observation is the most crucial tool you can possess, especially as the brain transitions from asking, where is it, to aggressively demanding, go get it. Cravings. The brain realizes the chemical is missing, and it activates a craving.
And cravings are perhaps the most terrifying part of the first 24 hours. When you are caught in the undertow of one, it feels like this immense crushing pressure that will just build and build infinitely until you inevitably crack.
You think, I can't survive this feeling for the rest of my life.
Right. If it feels this bad now, how bad will it be in an hour?
But that is a complete cognitive distortion. Neuroscience and behavioral psychology have dismantled the myth of the infinite craving.
They aren't permanent states.
No, they are acute biological events. They behave exactly like waves on an ocean. They rise rapidly, they hit a chaotic peak of intensity, and then inevitably they run out of biological energy and they crash.
The clinical data shows that the average craving wave lasts only about 5 to 20 minutes.
Just 5 to 20 minutes.
When you put a number on it, the impossible suddenly feels manageable. Just wait 20 minutes. But we really need to look at why those 20 minutes feel like a life or death survival imperative. Why is the urge so overpowering?
We have to look at how cannabis sensitizes the brain's reward circuitry over time.
Right.
Neuroimaging studies have focused deeply on the orbitofrontal cortex and the striatum.
Okay, what do those do?
The striatum is the engine of motivation and reward processing, while the orbitofrontal cortex assigns value to things in your environment.
Value, like this is important for my survival.
Exactly. For a long-term cannabis user, these regions have physically rewired themselves to prioritize the drug above almost everything else.
The researchers actually proved this, right? By showing users different visual cues inside the scanner.
Yes. When they showed them natural reward cues, like a picture of fresh fruit, which represents food and survival, the reward centers showed a normal baseline glow.
Okay.
But when they showed them a drug cue, a picture of a pipe or the smell of smoke, the striatum and the orbitofrontal cortex just erupted with massive metabolic activity.
The brain has literally learned to assign a higher survival value to the THC than to natural sustenance.
Yes. So when a cue triggers that heavily reinforced circuitry, maybe you walk past the room where you usually smoke, or you feel a specific type of stress, your brain doesn't just casually suggest that you use cannabis.
It screams that you must use it to survive the moment.
Exactly. And it's not just the reward center doing the screaming. The brain's fear center is heavily involved too.
The amygdala.
The amygdala. The literature shows a fascinating inverse relationship between chronic cannabis use and amygdala reactivity.
Because the amygdala is your threat detection system, right? It scans the environment for danger and triggers the fight or flight response.
Right, and regular heavy THC exposure acts like a heavy blanket thrown over the amygdala. It artificially dampens your fear and stress alarms. Over time, the brain just relies on the THC to keep the alarm turned off.
So when you remove the blanket on day one,
the alarm gets completely unmuted.
Wow. The amygdala suddenly fires up with no chemical restraint.
It becomes hyperreactive. It interprets minor everyday stressors, like, a drop set of keys, an annoying email, a loud noise, as severe threats.
Which explains the irritability.
Yes. This misfiring creates sudden, intense feelings of free-floating anxiety or flashes of irrational anger. You aren't just craving a reward. Your amygdala is falsely signaling that you are in mortal danger, and the reward circuitry is promising that cannabis is the only way to turn the terrifying alarm off.
Understanding this mechanics gives us, I think, the ultimate actionable protocol for a craving.
Absolutely.
When that 5 to 20-minute wave hits, do not fight it. Fighting a craving actually engages the prefrontal cortex in a struggle that gives the thought more energy.
It keeps the neural loop active.
Right. Instead, the strategy is to pause. Notice the sensation in your body. Is your chest tight? Is your jaw clenched?
Allow the physical feeling to exist without feeding the narrative attached to it.
Just watch the wave peak, knowing the biological reality is that it must run out of neurotransmitter fuel and crash. The brain simply cannot sustain the alarm indefinitely.
So the craving wave crashes. You survive the first evening, but as the clock ticks past the 24-hour mark and you enter day 2, the landscape shifts.
The second day. Day 2 is notoriously difficult.
It is the peak of the absence. The residual THC that was floating in your bloodstream and fat cells is finally clearing out in significant amounts.
The downregulated receptors are completely exposed.
And this triggers a massive chemical turbulence. Because the THC is gone, the brain attempts to kickstart its own chemical factories. But the machinery is rusty, and the resulting imbalance is profound.
I was looking at the McLean Hospital research, and they pinpoint the exact metabolic source of this turbulence. They focused on 2 fundamental neurotransmitters, GABA and glutamate.
Right. If the endocannabinoid system is the master thermostat, GABA and glutamate are the gas and brake pedals of the nervous system.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. Gamma-aminobutyric acid is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It is the brake pedal. When GABA binds to a neuron, it opens channels that let negatively charged chloride ions rush into the cell.
Making it negative?
Right, which makes the neuron less likely to fire. It calms the system, reduces excitability, relaxes your muscles, and prepares you for sleep.
And glutamate is the exact opposite.
Yes, it is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter, the gas pedal. When glutamate binds, it lets positively charged calcium and sodium ions into the cell, causing it to fire rapidly.
It stimulates the brain, drives learning, enhances memory formation, keeps you sharp and alert.
In a healthy, balanced brain, GABA and glutamate exist in a perfectly choreographed dance. But the McLean Hospital study demonstrates that chronic cannabis use severely disrupts this equilibrium, particularly in the striatum and the prefrontal cortex.
Because the brain relies on the depressant qualities of THC to act as a surrogate brake pedal.
Exactly. So it stops producing enough of its own GABA.
And when you abruptly take away the THC on day 2, you are left with a brain that has plenty of excitatory glutamate, but a severely depleted supply of inhibitory GABA.
The brake pedal is completely failing.
The resulting metabolic environment is hyperexcitability. There is way too much gas and almost no brake.
And the researchers propose that this specific localized GABA and glutamate imbalance is the direct mechanical cause of the most distressing withdrawal symptoms.
It's like wearing heavy noise-canceling headphones for years while walking through a busy city. You get used to the muffled silence. Then, on day 2, someone rips the headphones off.
Suddenly, the honking cars, the sirens, the hum of the streetlights, it's all rushing in at maximum volume.
Right. Without the GABA to artificially dampen the mental noise, your own internal thoughts feel deafening. Your heart rate feels too fast. Your skin feels too sensitive.
The clinical manifestation of this glutamate storm is the racing thoughts, the physical jitteriness, the feeling that you're crawling out of your skin, and the wild, unpredictable mood swings.
The nervous system is firing wildly because it has lost its inhibition.
But this is where the cognitive trap is most dangerous. When a person feels this intense anxiety and jitteriness on the second day, they almost always internalize it as a personal failure.
They think, look at me, I'm a wreck, my baseline is broken, I clearly have an anxiety disorder, and I need the cannabis just to function like a normal human being.
And that is the tragic irony, because what they're interpreting as failure is actually the exact metabolic process of healing.
Yes. That anxiety, that mental noise, it is the sensation of your central nervous system successfully waking up.
The discomfort is the proof that the brain is recognizing the GABA deficit and scrambling to upregulate its own natural production. If you didn't feel that uncomfortable hyperexcitability, it would mean the receptors weren't repairing themselves.
The discomfort is the work. It's exactly like the severe muscle soreness you feel 2 days after a heavy weightlifting session.
Right.
You don't lay in bed with sore legs and think, my legs are broken, I must go back to the couch. You understand that the micro tears and the inflammation are the exact mechanisms of the muscle growing stronger.
The anxiety on day 2 is just neurological soreness.
And nowhere is that neurological soreness more violently apparent than when you try to go to sleep.
Oh, the sleep changes.
Yeah, which brings us to the profound changes in sleep architecture during this window. The timelines from the Canadian Centre for Addictions highlight sleep disruption as the single most common and distressing symptom of acute cannabis withdrawal,
noting that patients frequently manage only 2 to 4 hours of highly fragmented sleep.
The sleep issues are legendary. And again, it all comes back to how THC alters the mechanics of the brain. To understand the withdrawal, we have to look at how cannabis changes the sleep cycle.
Right. Cannabis is famous for helping people fall asleep, and it does increase the time spent in deep, slow-wave sleep. But it does this at a heavy cost. It aggressively suppresses REM sleep.
REM stands for rapid eye movement. It is the phase of sleep where brain activity actually looks very similar to being awake.
It's when we experience our most vivid, narrative-driven dreams.
And REM is absolutely vital for cognitive function, isn't it?
Oh, essential. It is the phase where the brain processes emotional experiences, consolidates declarative memories, and clears out metabolic waste.
So how does THC stop it?
THC suppresses REM by altering the levels of acetylcholine and monoamines in the brainstem, essentially preventing the physiological switch into the REM state.
So, if someone has been smoking every night before bed for 5 years, they have been artificially suppressing their REM cycle for nearly 2,000 nights.
They have been dreaming properly in years.
The brain has built up a massive biological debt of unprocessed emotional data.
We refer to this clinically as REM pressure. The brain is desperately trying to enter REM, but the THC keeps pushing it down.
When you hit day 2 and day 3, the THC is finally gone.
The dam breaks. The brain, attempting to immediately pay off years of REM debt, floods the sleep cycle with an aggressive, highly concentrated surge of rapid eye movement sleep.
The REM rebound.
Yes, the REM rebound.
And the subjective experience of the REM rebound is wild. Because the brain is essentially binging on the REM stage, the dreams become incredibly vivid, deeply cinematic, and often intensely emotional or bizarre.
People report waking up feeling like they lived an entire second life during the night.
Right. And the nervous system is also still experiencing that glutamate spike we talked about, so the body's thermoregulation goes haywire during these intense dreams,
leading to severe night sweats. People routinely wake up at 3 a.m. having soaked straight through their clothes and their sheets.
The PMC NIH review offers a really granular timeline of these sleep disturbances. They found that the pure insomnia, the sheer inability to fall asleep or stay asleep for more than an hour, usually hits its peak right around day 2, mirroring that peak GABA deficit.
However, the REM rebound, the strange, vivid, and lucid dreams, actually peaks a bit later, around day 4.
Day 4.
Yeah, and it can continue in waves for several weeks as the brain slowly works through the backlog of REM pressure.
So if you are lying awake right now, staring at the ceiling, feeling your heart race, or if you just woke up drenched in sweat from a dream so vivid it felt like a memory, anchor yourself to this biology.
Your sleep system is not permanently broken. It is actively, aggressively reorganizing itself.
You are simply paying back a biological debt. It is exhausting and it is frustrating, but within a matter of weeks, the REM pressure will normalize and natural restorative deep sleep will return.
As we push through the exhaustion of those first few nights, we arrive at day 3, 48-72 hours.
Day 3. This is the period where the narrative begins to subtly shift. The sheer shock of the absence is wearing off, and the brain's automatic expectation of the drug begins to dissolve.
The physical habit starts to break down. That blind, automatic motion of your hand reaching for the vape or the pipe when you sit down on the couch, it starts to feel a little less deeply programmed.
But we need to be very precise here because the clinical data shows that day 3 is not a universal experience for everyone.
No, it is not. The PMC Clinical Review on Cannabis Withdrawal Syndrome analyzed thousands of patient trajectories and identified 2 distinct types of withdrawal courses.
Type A and Type B.
Exactly. Understanding which curve you are on is crucial for managing your expectations on day 3.
Let's break down the Type A curve first, because this is the one that really catches people off guard.
In a Type A withdrawal course, the symptoms begin on day 1, but they steadily increase in severity, crescendoing to a massive peak anywhere between day 2 and day 6.
Wow. So for a Type A individual, Day 3 might actually be the hardest, most physically grueling day of the entire process.
The receptors are screaming the loudest before they finally begin to adapt.
But the type B curve looks entirely different.
Yes. In a type B course, the symptoms are actually at their absolute worst on day 1, the immediate moment of cessation. From that point on, the severity decreases continuously.
Every day is marginally better than the last.
By day 3, a type B individual is already feeling a significant lifting of the fog.
The obvious question is, why the difference? Why do two people who smoke the same amount experience such vastly different trajectories?
The researchers propose a few mechanisms. One major factor is how the body stores cannabinoids. THC is highly lipophilic, meaning it binds tightly to fat cells.
It hides in the fat.
Right. In some individuals, the fat cells hold onto the THC and slowly leach it back into the bloodstream over days or weeks. This slow release might delay the peak of the withdrawal, creating a type A curve.
That makes total sense.
There's also baseline genetic differences. Some people's brains simply upregulate CB1 receptors faster than others, based on their unique genetic coding for neuroplasticity.
But regardless of whether you are riding the delayed peak of type A or the steady decline of type B, day 3 represents a profound internal turning point.
The acute panic of the system is fading.
The cravings, while still present, start to lose their jagged, overwhelming edge. They become less like survival imperatives and more like loud, annoying suggestions.
And in the spaces between those cravings, a new baseline begins to emerge. Patients often report experiencing sudden, unexpected bursts of natural energy.
A moment where a train of thought remains perfectly clear from beginning to end, a brief window where their attention feels surprisingly stable.
We mentioned earlier that the imaging study shows CB1 receptor density largely normalizes around the 4-week mark. Day 3 is the moment you first feel the faint early tremors of that 4-week reset.
The machinery is finally turning back on.
But as the brain begins to clear, the physical toll on the body becomes impossible to ignore. And this brings us to what we consider the most vital, potentially life-saving piece of medical context in this entire deep dive.
The diagnostic trap.
The diagnostic trap.
I cannot emphasize this section enough. This is where the medical system and the reality of withdrawal collide in a very dangerous way. We've established that the physical symptoms of the 72-hour mark are intense.
Very intense.
You have the severe night sweats. You have the profound bone-deep fatigue from the REM rebound. You have the gastrointestinal distress. Your neurotransmitters are fluctuating, which can cause muscle tremors, tension headaches, and diffuse joint pain as the body's inflammatory markers temporarily spike due to the stress response.
Now imagine a very common scenario. You are on day 3 or day 4. You are experiencing all of this. You wake up exhausted, your joints are aching, you are sweating profusely, and you feel generally unwell.
You get scared.
You get scared. You think, this can't just be from quitting weed. Something is systemically wrong with me. So you make an appointment with a primary care doctor.
But when you sit in the exam room, whether out of shame or fear of stigma or simply because you don't think it's medically relevant, you do not mention that you just abruptly ceased a heavy, long-term cannabis habit.
And here is where the trap closes. A doctor looks at a patient presenting with severe fatigue, unexplained night sweats, diffuse joint pain, and muscle aches. Without the context of the cannabis withdrawal, the doctor's diagnostic algorithm points in a very specific, very terrifying direction.
They don't think withdrawal, they think autoimmune disease.
They think your immune system has gone rogue and is actively attacking your own body.
And to confirm this suspicion, the doctor will order a massive immunological blood panel. The absolute cornerstone of that panel, the first test they run to screen for autoimmune disease, is an ANA assay.
Anti-nuclear antibodies.
Let's unpack the clinical guidelines from Dr. Oracle and the Journal of Family Practice that detail exactly why this test is so perilous for someone in withdrawal. First, what exactly is an anti-nuclear antibody?
Normal antibodies are proteins produced by your immune system to neutralize foreign invaders, like viruses or pathogenic bacteria. But autoantibodies are a mistake.
They're a friendly fire incident.
Exactly. They are antibodies that mistakenly target and react with the normal, healthy components of your own cells. Specifically, anti-nuclear antibodies target the nucleus, the command center, and the cytoplasm of your own human cells. They attack you.
Detecting these specific autoantibodies is how rheumatologists diagnose severe connective tissue diseases. Conditions like systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE-Sjogren's syndrome, scleroderma, and polymyositis.
These are life-altering, chronic, and potentially fatal diseases.
But the clinical guidelines from the Journal of Family Practice offer a massive flashing warning light regarding this test. They explicitly state that ANA assays should not be used indiscriminately for vague symptoms like general fatigue or aches.
Why? Because a positive ANA result does not automatically mean you have an autoimmune disease. In fact, it is shockingly common in perfectly healthy people.
The data they cite is staggering. A massive multi-center study demonstrated that 31.7% of completely healthy asymptomatic individuals will test positive for ANA at a low serum dilution.
Nearly a third of the entire human population walks around with these antibodies in their blood.
To understand why this happens, we have to explain how the lab actually processes the test.
Right, they take a sample of your blood serum and they dilute it with a saline solution to see how concentrated the antibodies are. This is called a titer.
A titer.
A titer of 1 to 40 means they mixed 1 part of your blood with 40 parts of saline. They put this diluted mixture on a slide with human cells, add a fluorescent tag that binds to the antibodies, and look at it under a microscope.
And if it glows, it's a positive result.
Yes, but a 1 to 40 dilution is incredibly weak. Finding antibodies at that level is clinically meaningless.
Right, as the researchers noted, 31.7% of healthy people glow at 1 to 40.
It could be triggered by advancing age, a slight genetic predisposition, a recent viral infection like a common cold, or just general physiological stress.
Like, for example, the massive stress of acute drug withdrawal.
Exactly. The lab will continue to dilute the blood to see how strong the concentration really is.
Yeah.
They test at 1 to 80, 1 to 160, 1 to 320, 1 to 640.
Wow.
If the slide is still glowing at a 1 to 640 dilution, meaning 1 part blood to 640 parts saline, that indicates a massive pathological concentration of autoantibodies. The study shows that while 31.7% are positive at 1 to 40, only 5% of healthy people remain positive at a 1 to 160 dilution.
Dr. Oracle's clinical guidelines provide a brilliant risk stratification to help doctors interpret these numbers. They classify a titer of 1 to 80 as the minimum threshold to even be considered a positive result.
But crucially, they classify a 1 to 80 titer as low risk. The guidelines explicitly command the physician. A 1 to 80 titer in the absence of severe, specific clinical signs requires reassurance and no further testing.
No follow-up.
None. But put yourself in the shoes of the patient in withdrawal. You feel absolutely terrible. You are exhausted and aching. The doctor calls you and says, well, your blood work came back and your ANA is positive.
The doctor might not properly explain the nuance of the 1 to 80 titer. You immediately open your laptop, you Google positive ANA, and you see lupus. You see organ failure.
The psychological terror that induces is catastrophic. And that sheer panic dumps massive amounts of cortisol and adrenaline into your already hyperexcitable, GABA-depleted nervous system.
The stress makes the withdrawal symptoms exponentially worse, which convinces you even further that you are dying of a systemic disease.
And the trap gets even deeper, because the immunofluorescent test doesn't just look at the dilution, it looks at the actual pattern of how the antibodies glow under the microscope.
The lab report will list one of 5 specific fluorescent patterns, and if you are staring at this lab report at 2 a.m., the medical jargon will terrify you.
We need to walk through these 5 patterns so you understand exactly what the lab is looking at and why you shouldn't jump to conclusions.
Let's demystify the patterns. The first one is homogeneous.
In a homogeneous pattern, the entire nucleus of the cell fluoresces evenly, like a solid glowing circle. It is the most prevalent pattern, accounting for about 27.7% of all positive tests.
And clinically, a high-titer homogeneous pattern is strongly associated with systemic lupus erythematosus and drug-induced lupus.
But again, to diagnose lupus, a rheumatologist needs to see specific clinical criteria. A photosensitive butterfly rash across the cheeks, severe pleuritic chest pain when breathing, specific kidney involvement. They don't diagnose it based on withdrawal fatigue in a glowing circle.
Right. The second pattern is the rim pattern.
Here, only the outer perimeter of the nucleus lights up, creating a glowing halo. This pattern is highly specific to SLE and a condition called CREST syndrome.
CREST is a severe variant of systemic sclerosis, right?
Yes, that involves painful calcium deposits under the skin, Raynaud's phenomenon where the blood vessels in the fingers violently constrict in the cold, turning them stark white, severe esophageal dysmotility, and the tightening of the skin on the hands and face.
Okay. The third pattern is speckled, which is the second most common at 26.5%.
In the speckled pattern, the nucleus looks like a starry night sky, dozens of tiny glowing dots. This pattern is a catch-all. It can be seen in lupus, but it's heavily associated with Sjogren's syndrome, which is an autoimmune attack on the moisture-producing glands causing severe, debilitating dry eyes and dry mouth.
It's also seen in mixed connective tissue disease and various forms of scleroderma.
Right. Fourth is the nucleolar pattern. Inside the nucleus is an even smaller, denser structure called the nucleolus. In this pattern, only the nucleoli fluoresce.
That sounds rare.
It is a rare pattern and is almost exclusively associated with diffuse scleroderma, a devastating disease where the body overproduces collagen, leading to the hardening of the skin and internal organs, frequently causing severe interstitial lung disease.
And finally, the fifth pattern is cytoplasmic.
In this pattern, the nucleus remains dark, but the cytoplasm, the fluid filling the rest of the cell, lights up. This points away from lupus and towards conditions like polymyositis, which causes profound progressive muscle weakness and purplish skin discoloration, or autoimmune liver conditions like primary biliary cirrhosis.
We are dragging you through the terrifying weeds of autoimmune immunology for one specific reason:
to arm you with knowledge.
If you are on day 3 and your joints ache and you are exhausted and you happen to get blood work done, there is a nearly 1 in 3 chance your ANA will come back positive at a low titer simply because your body is under stress.
Your lab report might say, positive ANA, speckled pattern.
And if you don't know the data we just discussed, you will find yourself sitting in a rheumatologist's office, waiting months for an appointment, undergoing incredibly expensive and invasive secondary testing, utterly convinced you have scleroderma or lupus.
When in reality, you do not have a disease. Your body is simply metabolizing the absence of THC.
You are experiencing the temporary inflammation of the glutamate storm. You're experiencing the fatigue of the REM rebound.
The Journal of Family Practice warns that indiscriminate ANA testing yields positive results that falsely point to connective tissue disease, leading to errant management decisions.
Your body is a miraculous, self-correcting machine. It is already restoring its equilibrium automatically. Your only role right now is to not interfere with that process, and crucially, not to panic and chase false medical diagnoses for symptoms that are nothing more than your nervous system aggressively rebuilding itself.
If you feel terrible today, I want you to anchor yourself to this phrase. This is withdrawal. This is my brain waking up. I do not have a mysterious illness. The machine is just fixing itself.
That is the most empowering realization you can possibly have in the first 72 hours. And once you clear that hurdle and you avoid the diagnostic panic, you cross into a much broader, much more hopeful landscape of healing.
Which brings us beyond the 72 hours and into the profound science of neuroplasticity.
While the acute physical turbulence, the sweats, the intense cravings, the immediate insomnia begins to settle down after the first few days, the brain's structural rewiring takes more time.
According to the Canadian Centre for Addictions timeline, as you move into weeks 2 through 4, the primary challenge shifts from physical hyperexcitability to a profound emotional flatness.
They call it anhedonia, the clinical inability to feel pleasure. And when we look at the biology we discussed earlier, this makes perfect sense.
We talked about how the striatum, the brain's reward center, was hijacked by the massive dopamine spikes caused by THC. The brain downregulates its dopamine receptors, just like it downregulates the CB1 receptors.
So when you remove the THC, your baseline dopamine levels drop through the floor. The receptors are deaf.
Normal, everyday stimuli, eating a delicious meal, watching a beautiful sunset, laughing at a joke with a friend, simply do not register.
The reward center cannot generate enough electrical activity to make you feel joy. The world feels gray and completely flat.
It is incredibly disheartening to survive the physical gauntlet of the first 72 hours, only to feel depressed and hollow 2 weeks later. But the timeline shows that this too is temporary.
By months 2 and 3, the anhedonia breaks. The dopamine receptors upregulate. The brain fog physically lifts.
Patients report that their memory function noticeably improves. They stop losing their train of thought mid-sentence, their processing speed increases, the machinery is fully online.
And modern pharmacological science is actively developing tools to support this longer-term architectural rebuild. The clinical data from the UMK Review on Pharmacotherapy for Cannabis Use Disorder highlights several fascinating adjunctive treatments that target the specific mechanisms we've discussed today.
Let's look at the CBD data first. We often hear about CBD colloquially, but the clinical application is very specific.
Right.
The researchers reviewed double-blind, placebo-controlled trials showing that high doses of pharmaceutical-grade CBD, specifically between 400 milligrams and 800 milligrams, can significantly reduce cannabis use.
And the mechanism here is brilliant, right? Because CBD does not bind directly to the main active site of the CB1 receptor like THC does, so it doesn't cause intoxication.
Instead, it acts as a negative allosteric modulator. It binds to a different part of the receptor and alters its shape, which helps smooth out the chaotic signaling of the endocannabinoid system, gently reducing anxiety and craving without providing a high.
The review also looked at gabapentin, and this connects directly back to the McLean Hospital study about the gas and brake pedals.
Exactly. Gabapentin was originally developed as an anti-seizure medication. Structurally, it mimics GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, the brake pedal.
In a study of 50 individuals undergoing cannabis withdrawal, gabapentin showed a significant reduction in both cravings and the physical symptoms of withdrawal.
Because the brain is suffering from a massive GABA deficit in those early weeks, gabapentin acts like synthetic brake fluid. It artificially provides the necessary inhibition to calm the glutamate storm, giving the brain a smooth ride while it manufactures its own natural GABA.
They also discuss a completely different approach using FAA inhibitors. This one is incredible because it leverages the body's own anandamide.
FAAH stands for fatty acid amide hydrolase. It is the enzyme whose sole job is to hunt down and destroy anandamide, our natural bliss molecule, almost immediately after the brain produces it.
FAAH inhibitors are experimental drugs that block this enzyme.
By preventing the breakdown of anandamide, these drugs allow the brain's own natural endocannabinoids to build up and pool around the receptors.
This naturally reduces the severity of the withdrawal by utilizing the body's native chemistry rather than introducing an external synthetic molecule.
These pharmacological tools are fascinating, and they show how deeply we're beginning to understand the ECS. But the real magic, the ultimate cure for the addiction, isn't a pill.
It's a fundamental biological property outlined in our Freedom Recovery Center's source, the concept of neuroplasticity.
This is the most hopeful, empowering science in the entire field of neurology. For decades, we believed the adult brain was static, that once it was wired, it was fixed.
We now know that the brain is highly plastic. It is malleable. It physically changes its cellular architecture based entirely on how you use it.
Addiction alters the brain's reward pathways by carving deep, wide, incredibly efficient neural highways that lead straight from any stressor to substance use.
The highway is so wide that the thought travels down it automatically. But the principle of neuroplasticity tells us that recovery is the active process of creating new neural highways.
Every single time you feel a craving, every time that 5 to 20 minute wave of absolute panic hits your amygdala, and you choose a healthy alternative response instead of reaching for cannabis, you are physically doing construction work in your brain.
If you feel a craving and you immediately go for a run, your brain lays down a microscopic sheath of myelin, an insulating layer of protein and fat along that new neural pathway, making the stress to exercise route slightly faster and more efficient for next time.
If you feel a craving and you utilize cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to reframe the thought, or if you simply sit and breathe through the discomfort, you are literally wiring new neurons together.
Neurons that fire together wire together.
And the inverse is equally true. Because you are no longer sending traffic down the old addiction highway, the brain realizes that massive piece of infrastructure is no longer needed.
Through a cellular process called synaptic pruning, the brain actively dismantles the old neural connections. The physical pathway of the addiction weakens, degrades, and fades from lack of use.
You aren't just resisting a bad habit. You aren't just using willpower. You are structurally rebuilding the physical architecture of your mind.
Which brings us back to the present moment, today, the boundary you have set.
We have covered an immense amount of biological terrain today. We started by looking at the baseline, how chronic THC forces the CB1 receptors to downregulate, pulling the volume dials down and blunting the metabolic activity in the executive and interoceptive centers of your brain.
We move through the immediate disruption of day one, understanding that the initial restlessness and stomach upset is simply your brain's prediction machine throwing an error code because the expected chemical input didn't arrive.
We learned that cravings are not infinite mountains, but 5 to 20 minute biological waves driven by a sensitized striatum and a hyperreactive amygdala.
We dove into the chemical turbulence of day two, where the glutamate gas pedal gets stuck to the floor because the GABA brakes have failed, causing the intense mental noise and physical anxiety.
We looked at the mechanics of the REM rebound, understanding that the vivid dreams and night sweats are just the sleep architecture, aggressively paying off years of biological debt.
We saw the critical turning point of day 3, exploring the differences between the delayed peak of the type A withdrawal curve and the steady decline of the type B curve.
We mapped out the terrifying diagnostic trap, detailing exactly why the inflammatory stress of withdrawal can trigger a false positive ANA assay and why you must not let a 1 to 40 speckled fluorescent pattern convince you that your body is failing.
And finally, we looked at the long game. The eventual lifting of the anhedonia, the promise of the 4-week receptor reset, and the profound structural power of neuroplasticity to physically prune away the addiction and myelinate a new path forward.
As we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final paradigm shift, something to carry with you through the next few hours and into tomorrow.
What if the intense anxiety you feel right now is not a sign of weakness? What if the insomnia is not an illness? What if the tension in your chest is not a failure of willpower?
What if those cravings, the sweating, and the mental noise are quite literally the physical metabolic sensation of your brain expanding?
What if it is the feeling of your cells repairing their downregulated receptors, cleaning out the synapses, and rebuilding the architecture of your mind from the inside out?
Healing is a violently physical process. It is rarely comfortable, but it is happening right now. In every single cell of your nervous system, the machine is correcting itself.
So observe the waves, do not fight them, just watch them crash. Be infinitely patient with the biological process, and stay steady in the boundary you have drawn. Today is different, just today. No cannabis.
Take a deep breath. You are doing exactly what you need to be doing.
We will see you on the other side of the 72 hours.